Good morning. I want to thank the AIM and Dr. Ernstoff for inviting me to speak. Despite the questions of my mom when I told her I was going to get a degree in epidemiology, it's not really about skin, it's really about disease and risk factors. I want to, before I get started, just say that we have a very active survivorship program. It's open to people who live in the area or anywhere in Western New York. You don't have to have been treated here. And in the survivorship program, we do a very detailed assessment of you and any residual issues that you may have regarding your treatment. As we have already heard, and we'll hear some more, there are a lot of toxicities associated with being treated for melanoma, and some of those you can live with for a really long time. We have a great team that will try and figure out or help you to figure out what long-term side effects you might have and what we can do about them. We have a multidisciplinary team. We have recruited many support services, both within Roswell and within the community, to make it easy for you. And we have a big emphasis on cancer screening. So if you see something you want to have evaluated, we can get you an appointment. We can help you schedule the other cancer screenings like colonoscopy or lung cancer screening, or just to kind of get you back on track. And the focus of this program is really on rehabilitation and wellness. So please feel free. I think there are some brochures out on the table to take advantage of this program. You can come once. You can come when you get your normal appointment. We don't compete with the oncology team. We supplement the oncology team and are happy to work with you and work with your primary care physician. So I'm going to talk today about some of the risk factors, and the reason I'm going to start with that is because that kind of dictates how you prevent or get an early detection for melanoma, some of the strategies for prevention, and describe screening. And I think, we'll go very quickly through this because I think Dr. Parra has done an excellent job with that. I think as most of you are survivors or caregivers in the room, with 2 million survivors of some form of melanoma in the country, you are the advocates in terms of communicating this information to your family and to friends. We have a really hard time controlling some things like tanning beds, and we need people to help us do that as advocates for knowing what this disease is about. So I'm going to probably say that a couple more times during my talk. So in terms of the risk factors, obviously the UV exposure from sun exposure and indoor tanning is one of the major risk factors for melanoma. Obviously, and I'll talk some more about that in detail, as Dr. Parra was saying, the moles, both the large atypical moles that you have from birth, the numbers of moles are, and I'll show some numbers on that. The more you have, the more risk for melanoma you're at. Having fair skin, redheads, it was always something we knew about. It's not just about freckles, but clearly having red hair, blonde hair, fair skin is a risk factor. 10% of melanomas are in people who have a family history. So if you have multiple people in your family who've had a melanoma, it only increases the risk of other members of your family from having melanoma. We also know that there's some genes that are related to familial melanoma. Generally, you have to have a positive family history to get tested for these, but this is an emerging field. And as time goes forward, if you've been tested, you may need to be retested as more genes are going to be found to be associated with these familial risks. But right now, there are 3 predominant genes that we know are inherited down through families. Previous skin cancers, there is that group of non-melanoma skin cancers. which peak between 50s and 70s. These are squamous cell, mostly in basal cell, and while they carry, especially squamous, carries some of its own risk for metastasis or invasion, these are really great surrogate lesions for sun damage. And again, sun damage, UV, and the risk of melanoma. Age is something that unfortunately we cannot control, but melanoma increases with age. And part of that is this accumulation of sun damage and other risk factors that are associated with melanoma. Again, we know that certain forms of melanoma occur earlier in their 50s and others occur later in their 60s and 70s. We also know, and there's an emerging field of research on the effects of age as the major risk factor for all cancers. And that's because many of the systems in our body, like our immune surveillance and our ability to repair DNA, are altered as you age. They're not as effective. And so it's both the accumulation of sun, and it's also that some of our normal processes that monitor for cancer are not as good as we get older. There is a big field of research now going on in this area since we have an aging population. And I think going in the next decade, we're going to possibly be able to address some of these changes that happen with age that may actually improve our both our response to cancer treatment and also maybe deter some of the cancer development. And this sort of leads into this: when you have a weakened or suppressed immune system after organ transplant or leukemia or lymphoma treatment, these are times when, again, this immune surveillance that Dr. Ernstoff talked about is impaired, and cancers can form. We also see increased non-melanoma skin cancers after transplantation. Again, that is a good signal that you have an impaired immune system, and that having checks and being more diligent about surveillance is important for these patients. So I can't really give a talk without showing some graphs and numbers, and so you're going to have to forgive me. But in terms of melanoma of the skin, Australia and New Zealand have particularly high rates, and part of it is they're around the equator, and also there are people who are transplanted from the UK and plunked in to Australia and New Zealand. So you really have taken the two big risk factors of sun exposure and fair skin and put them together. And this synergy is what we see in Australia. Again, if you look at people along the equator in other countries who don't have as many Caucasians, you don't see the same increase in risk. But you can see that the risk is really associated again with, skin type. Now, we can talk about the U.S. and some of our sun habits. And, I was reading in preparation for this because, I feel compelled to read papers in the literature. But, for instance, there's a lot of research done in Norway and some of the Scandinavian countries where you think, well, they don't really have a lot of sun, or when they do, it's so short-lived, and then it's either dark or light all the time, but it's not an intense sun exposure. But they have really bad sun habits because they love to vacation where it's really sunny, and they have a lot. They're not responsible when they do that. I did my graduate work in Arizona, where you have snowbirds, and we have Florida for people in Buffalo. And when people go to these sunny environments, they're so happy to get out of the cold. They just really get a sun exposure. And it can be an intense sun exposure. So this idea of burning and of these episodic intense exposures happen with people from these northern countries, and we see that a lot in Buffalo. So just so I looked, and I'm not great on social media, but I did comb the internet. There's a lot of falsehoods about tanning and about sun exposure. And we have to remember, and I got some slides, this is one of them from Dr. Perra, that tanning is an adaptation, it's a signal of DNA damage. And we're concerned with antioxidants and concerned with a lot of things, obviously smoking and other exposures, but tanning is a signal that we're exposing our skin to DNA damage. And when you look around and you look at yourself, you can see, I have moderate damage on my forearms from my years of hiking in Arizona, but it is a signal that I have damage here. And those sun-exposed areas are really important. Now, not every melanoma occurs in a sun-exposed area, but we have to remember that the message for tanning is not that it makes you look healthier, that you actually have done something to your skin. So with age worldwide, we see that the majority of melanomas occur in people from 50s to 75 plus. There is a growing number of women under 30 who are getting, and under 40 who are getting melanomas. And again, we relate this to a lot of intense sun exposure, but again, this is the majority of in older age. And we know that this is a multifactorial disease of both exposures and some of this inborn changes that happen to us when we age. So just to, we say risk factors, not every risk factor is the same. And so there have been several studies in the last few years that have taken a lot of studies and tried to summarize the things they see in them. And this is just a few that I have put together. But, in terms of tanning with redness, when you see an odds ratio of 2.0, that means twice the risk. So it doubles your risk when you are tanning and you have an underlying redness. Now, I know I was horrified when I had one of my postdocs come and say, I went to the tanning bed because I've been, I'm so pale, and if I tan before I go to Florida, I won't get a sunburn. Well, the reality is it's hiding your sunburn. So if you tend to burn, you will always tend to burn. And, there's no preparation to prevent burning. It's your skin type. If you get 2 to 3 sunburns a year, you see 3 to 4 times the risk. And this again is our summaries over multiple studies. When I 40 years or 50 years ago, when I was starting to go to the beach in Rhode Island, you used baby oil because then you'd get a good burn, and then it would turn into a tan and you would peel. And those things still go on. But it really magnifies the risk. So having multiple sunburns a year. And we think about kids, you really want to prevent little kids from starting off with, thinking of a sunburn as a normal experience, because it shouldn't be a normal experience. Blonde hair, this blonde hair, fair skin type can double your risk, but if you're really a redhead, you fourfold increase in risk of melanoma if you have that. And so I just am letting you see that there really is a magnitude of difference between one hair color and another. If you have multiple, oddly shaped moles, you really see an increased risk 5 to 10-fold. Now, to put it in perspective, the way I look at it is that smoking is associated with lung cancer. We all know that, right? Smoking, the risk of smoking and lung cancer is between 10 and 20-fold increased risk of lung cancer. So having multiple oddly shaped moles on your body really is a significant risk factor. And that's why people who have them really need to be checked on a regular basis. Between 2 and 7 moles doubles your risk, and 7 or more, 7-fold increase in risk. So, when you think of yourself, or you think of people in your family, or you hear us talking, that is really kind of the magnitude that we're talking about. So skin cancer is now the second most common cancer among women in their 20s. We still see breast cancer leading the way, but that is significant, and that is a trend that is new. And when Dr. Perra talked about the increases in melanoma, this is a group where we're seeing this intense increase, and this is really important for us to understand. For women who tan, that under the age of 30, you see they will carry a lifetime just from the tanning alone, lifetime risk of having 75% increase in their risk. And again, it's the beginning of, it signals DNA damage. And there are ways to get a tan. You know, the cosmetic industry has really stepped up in many ways of doing appropriate labeling. And they've also created what are really improved spray-on tans. So if you feel, you know, I know in the beginning, like when I was growing up, it was a horrible experience using a tan that you put on. It was like a blotch city, but now it's really, they've really come a long way. And part of that is so that you can, if you feel like you want to have a tan, you can do it without sitting in the sun. So scanning the internet for images, you are inundated with the messaging around tanning. And you know, this is, again, as advocates of having experienced melanoma, we really need to impress this message to people in our families. We have to begin. Buffalo is an incredible place for tanning. And it's part of the culture here is to have a tan. And you look good and you feel good and you get tan. And those are still the messages which predominate on the internet and blogs. A lot of the falsities about what tanning provides, you know, are there. And people feel better, they feel thinner, you know. Take some me time, go sit in a tanning booth. I mean, it's the messaging is really crazy about tanning. So then there are the non-melanoma skin cancers, and again, you know, you can have those treated, biopsied, you know, sprayed with liquid nitrogen. They are definitely a signal of long-term sun exposure. I worked on a study with a bunch of farmers in the southeast U.S., and you know, the numbers of actinic keratoses that they would get on their ears if they wore baseball caps, and on their hands, the exposure to arsenicals really accentuated this. And many of them went on to develop melanoma in addition to having multiple non-melanoma skin cancers. But it really was a signal of their sun exposure. Again, immune function is a really important relationship to non-melanoma skin cancers. Constant damage of the skin with ulcers and skin diseases. There's some genetics involved in non-melanoma skin cancers, but again, these are associated, the numbers are associated with melanoma risk. So obviously the best way to prevent, if it's not strictly genetically related, is to prevent the sun damage. And the other thing, and I think we've heard this multiple times, is getting it diagnosed early clearly is a life-saving event. So, you know, in New York State, the only legislation which we're really standing up for is that we have required that sunscreens be properly labeled. And I know there is some legislation out there to start talking about tanning beds, but to use broad spectrum sunscreens, and now you can get them available. You know, I've used a sunscreen, you know, 30 plus in my lotion. They're, you know, easy to get. I've done that since I lived in Arizona. I'm not sure it helped completely, but avoid staying outdoors for long periods and seeking shade. And avoid the intense times of the sun exposure, which is obviously in the midday. To wear long sleeve shirts, pants, big hats, again, all sun protection. And, you know, they're stylish now. You know, it's not just the, I mean, Carhartt is making great sun protective, you know, clothing. LL Bean, everyone has it for kids and for adults, and I think that that is really a sign of the times. And avoid tanning, and at any point, and staying alert to changes in your eyes, because we know ocular melanoma is also related to sun exposure, and wearing sunglasses with UV protection. So, you know, sun protection starts in childhood. And, there have been many efforts. The Australians and New Zealanders have led the way, but actually Germany has done a very good job with some of their, starting with very young kids and really changing the perception of tanning and of skin color. But many countries in Norway, the UK, and actually in the US, we haven't been so successful at really changing the tanning habits. But again, seeking shade, avoid the peak, not burning, avoiding tanning, and covering up. And we've really come a long way with messaging and with starting to move with messaging and what's available, online for sun protective clothing. And Dr. Perras said this, and I just want to reiterate, and this is with all cancers, is to know your body, and to get help in your own skin exam, so that if something looks suspicious, to get it checked out, either by your primary care. You can take pictures and show your physician to document changes over time. We all have cell phones, we all have cameras, is to really start to track things. And again, not to do it so frequently, but to do it on a monthly basis so that you can begin to really see differences if things are changing, and take a picture and put it in a file and keep that log for yourself so that you know when things are starting to change. And again, this is across the board with all cancer screenings, that the earlier that you pick up this change, the better, both for your prognosis and for the treatment will do to your body. And to get help. I mean, if there's something on your back that's really bothering you. I mean, my husband is a melanoma survivor. I know every mole that on his back and on his legs. And we've been into Roswell to have a few things biopsied. He hates it when I disclose this stuff, but oh well. But that's part of our partnership, is to make sure that if his melanoma were to come back, that we would pick it up early. I think that's it. So thank you very much, and I'll look forward to questions.